This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 10 dead and nearly 500 arrested in a wave of violence in South Africa. Chinese drug makers to supply at least 110 million vaccines to COVAX initiative. And the European Union agrees to send military training mission to Mozambique. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, Moscow lifts the 2015 ban on flights to Egyptian resorts. And in your sports, Egyptian boxers eye the first Olympic medal since Athens 2004 Games. We start off in South Africa, where the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma has led to social unrest. So far, at least 10 people have died and nearly 500 people have been arrested. The unrest started last week in KwaZulu-Natal. Zuma is a native of the region where he enjoys widespread support. It has since spread to South Africa's largest city, Johannesburg. Several COVID-19 vaccination sites have been attacked in the country, hampering immunization efforts. Several shops and malls have also been looted. The military has since been deployed to support police efforts to contain the violence. This comes as the country attempts to bolster an economy that's already hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, let's cross over to CGTN's Angelo Coppola. He's joining us live from Johannesburg. Angelo, so what is the latest on the unrest in South Africa?
Well, the police services and National Defence Force briefing is underway at the moment. The death count is increasing. We now understand that in KwaZulu-Natal, 30 people have been reported dead related to the violence and the unrest and obviously the looting and arson. Communities in the KwaZulu-Natal area are now banding together. They're arming themselves so they can protect themselves because they claim that they're not being protected by the police in the area. So that's a disturbing and concerning development since we last spoke. We do understand that the SAPs, that's the police services, have asked that people don't take the law into their own hands. Meanwhile, in Gauteng, there was widespread looting in the Alexandra area, which is to the east of Sandton, the big shopping and business center of Johannesburg. We do understand that there was some automatic fire in the shops there last night. That unrest and running battles is continuing, so we'll keep you updated on that. But there are provincial briefings underway at the moment. So at the moment we have 6 people confirmed dead in the Gauteng area and some 750 people arrested nationally thus far. Beatrice.
Angelo, we do understand, though, that the military has been deployed. Can you tell us more about the military deployment, where the soldiers are and what they're expected to do?
Well, at the moment we understand that some 2,500 soldiers have been deployed in KwaZulu-Natal. We know that troops are on the streets in Pietermaritzburg area. We understand that troops have also been deployed in Gauteng. We know that they were on the streets in Soweto and Diepkloof, which are suburbs to the south of Johannesburg. We don't know how many troops are going to be deployed in the Gauteng just yet. We do know that their mission is to support the South African police services. They're not going to act independently or be deployed on separate individual missions as they were in the first lockdown. Their job is to ensure that the police operate in a safe and protected environment so that they can do their jobs of arresting looters and arsonists and rioters. That's their key focus. They don't have arrest powers. The problem, though, NGOs are telling us, is that they're carrying live rounds in their weapons, and that's a concern for NGOs in the area. The army did act in a very heavy-handed manner during the last hard lockdown, so this is a concern for most people. The president, of course, can increase the number of soldiers that are being deployed. We don't know if he's going to do anything at the moment. So as it stands right now, we have some 2,500 troops on the ground in boots. Beatrice.
Angelo, so this unrest has come about because of the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma. Now, South Africa's Constitutional Court was scheduled to hear Jacob Zuma's appeal yesterday. What more can you tell us about this?
That court case ran for the whole day. It started at 9 in the morning, and by 9 o'clock last night they were still in debate, and there were still agreements and arguments being heard from all parties involved, from Zuma's defense lawyer Dalian Pofu through to friends of the court, and of course the Zondo Commission's legal representative was also on hand. They brought the case against Zuma for not appearing in front of the Constitutional Court on 3 occasions, and of course the judges are saying, well, not the judges so much, it's in fact Zuma's lawyers are saying that they acted and they made a mistake by sending somebody to jail without him having stood trial. So there was a long debate around that issue yesterday, but by 9 o'clock last night the judges had had enough. They closed off the arguments and they reserved judgment. So we anticipate that judgment will be heard in the coming days, but there is no sense of urgency just yet. And of course Jacob Zuma does stay in jail in his nice, warm, comfortable hospital cell until the court comes back with its ruling. Beatrice?
All right, Angelo Coppola joining us there from Johannesburg. Meanwhile, though, South Africa's vaccine program is moving full speed ahead after a slow start. The country has the highest number of infections on the continent. It has registered over 2.2 million COVID-19 cases. However, the vaccine program faces challenges after violence and looting flared up in parts of the country. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Vaccinations in South Africa and other parts of the continent are picking up, but African nations still remain far behind the rest of the world. Just 60 million of the 3.3 billion doses administered globally have been on the continent, which means African people still remain highly vulnerable to COVID-19 infection. South Africa's vaccine program is gaining momentum as more vaccines flow into the country. Over 4 million Johnson & Johnson's and Pfizer doses have been administered. Close to 2 million people are now fully vaccinated.
We are ramping our vaccination rollout program so that the vaccine can reach the majority of our population, so that more people can be protected from this devastating impact of the COVID-19 virus. Continue to see more drives and initiatives by various provinces for increased mobilization for vaccination. Of note this week is the vaccine drive-through in Gauteng.
Containing a third wave driven by the highly infectious Delta variant has been difficult.
Although indications are the number of cases in Gauteng are peaking, however, Gauteng province remains the epicenter of the third wave. We're extremely worried about the rise in numbers of cases in other provinces that are likely to follow the same trend, most notably Western Cape, Limpopo, Northwest, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga.
Healthcare workers, the elderly and essential staff have been given priority in the ongoing vaccinations. The net will soon be cast wider to include younger people from the age of 35.
What we want to do is vaccinate as many people as possible to try and prevent severe disease and death. If we can achieve what the government is aiming for, that is to vaccinate 300,000 people a day, okay? Then we will vaccinate most South Africans by the end of the year.
But widespread violence and looting, which has erupted in parts of the country, may, however, set back the fight to contain the virus.
This is a big concern. It seems absolutely obvious that we may get resurgences beyond of what we would have seen if this protest action did not happen. So not just is our health services interrupted, but also vaccinations, obviously. All the vaccination centers that I know of in KwaZulu-Natal are not open.
The army has been called in to restore order. Further setbacks to the vaccination program could cost South Africa dearly as new COVID-19 infections and deaths continue to climb. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Doctors in the Democratic Republic of Congo are on a strike. Medics in public hospitals downed their tools on Monday as they demanded allowances. The strike is taking place at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has claimed over 1,000 lives and infected about 45,000 people in the country. The doctors have urged other health workers in the frontline fight against COVID-19 to also down their tools. Well, CGTN's Chris Ochamringa is joining us now from Kinshasa. Chris, what is the latest on the doctors' strike?
Yes, Beatrice, the strike has entered its second day, and the doctors have said they have reduced their services to a minimum, which means they're only treating people in critical condition and children under their care. They have refused to admit new patients, and they have given the government 4 days to increase their salaries, or else they will stop dealing with all patients under their care. The 4 days are set to elapse on Friday, and so it's a very dire situation for patients in the DRC. Beatrice?
It is a dire situation, as you mentioned, Chris. So what has been the impact of the strike so far, and how is the government dealing with it?
Well, there are very many patients who have been turned away from health facilities, public health facilities across the DRC. We haven't been able to get the exact numbers, but some of the authorities we spoke to say they have not been receiving any new patients until the government addresses their concerns. They're saying that they have about 11,500 doctors in hospitals, public hospitals across the country. Most of them are earning about $450 a month, and they're saying they want that salary increased to between $1,500 and $2,500 for the senior health experts. Now, the government has been holding a series of meetings, but they say that they cannot afford to pay that amount of money because they're dealing with other crises like the insecurity in Eastern DRC. The doctors are not are having none of that because they are saying that the government recently increased the salary of magistrates, and so they have been playing a very important role in fighting epidemics like Ebola, measles, cholera, and so they will not accept the government's position. They have been holding a series of meetings. The government, the latest meeting they had with the National Union of Doctors was on Sunday, and the government urged the doctors to give them until the 4th. They said they requested them to continue treating patients, and so we're waiting to see what this will happen. But it's certainly going to have a devastating impact on the healthcare system in the DRC because this is a country with about 90 million people. Most of the people living in the rural areas cannot afford to go to private health facilities, and so if the doctors and the government do not reach a deal on Friday, then it's really going to be a very bad situation for the ordinary Congolese. Beatrice?
All right, Chris Ochamringa joining us there from Kinshasa. Let's now head to Mozambique, where the European Union says it will set up a military training mission. This is aimed at helping tackle a growing insurgency and protect civilians in the northern province of Cabo Delgado. The mandate of the mission is set to last 2 years. Around 200 to 300 personnel could be deployed to Mozambique by the end of the year. That is according to a statement released by the European bloc after it met in Brussels on Monday. It is not immediately clear which countries will provide the necessary troops. Portugal already sent 60 soldiers to its former colony in May. They ran a 4-month program to train troops, share intelligence, and use drones to track militant movements.
This mission will train selected Mozambican units to help the armed forces in the efforts to bring back safety and security. This commitment now needs to be properly resourced and accompanied by the adequate assistance measures. So I've been asking the member states that once the mission has been agreed to provide the means, the staff that this mission will require.
Well, let's cross over now to Tony Wattman is joining me from Brussels, and Willem Els, who is the senior training coordinator at the Institute for Security Studies, is joining me from Pretoria, South Africa. Tony, first to you though, the European Union has agreed to assist Mozambique by sending a training mission there. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this training mission is going to last 2 years, at least initially, and the aim of this mission is very clear: to provide military support and training to the Mozambican armed forces who are fighting this insurgency in Cabo Delgado. And this is something that they've been facing now since 2017, but really in the last year we've seen this exponential rise in violence. There are now 3,000 people who have died, over 700,000 people who have been displaced. Food is becoming more and more scarce, and there's concerns that the region could tip into a humanitarian crisis. But this mission is a direct response to a plea that the Mozambican government made to the European Union back in September of last year, asking for assistance to restore peace and security in the region. And the EU defense ministers had already agreed to deploy troops to the region back in May. The High Representative, Joseph Borrell, we just heard from him there saying that this is going to be a mission that is going to train specific units in Mozambique. They're going to be forming quick response forces. These are going to be trained in operational preparedness, counterterrorism, the protection of civilians, and quite crucially for the EU, also in upholding global international humanitarian laws. This is not going to be a mission that is quite as big as the one that is already underway in Mali, where the EU has also sent in forces for training against an insurgency, but it is going to provide resources on the ground.
Willem, why has it taken almost 4 years for the international community to finally wake up to the threat posed by militants in Mozambique? It's been quite a while.
Yes, indeed, it did. There are various factors that may be responsible for that. For one, we see that the Mozambican government has pulled a curtain on information coming out of Cabo Delgado. There's a blackout in terms of the press. There's a blackout in terms of research going on there. So the rest of the world and the rest of Mozambique, for that matter, was actually deprived of information coming out of the area. That on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, we live in a pandemic in the world where a lot of countries have got their own challenges at the moment, more focused on surviving, etc., etc. And that take a while. As a matter of fact, many people died, and more than 700,000+ people have been displaced internally before there was an attack on the town of Palma. And one of the reasons that the attack actually drew the attention of the international community was that you had many expats living in Palma, working at the Afungi Peninsula that is actually being built now to do the refinery for the liquid natural gas that will be extracted from that area. So it's a combination of a few things, but those are the main factors.
Right. So, Tony, do we know the countries that will provide assistance and what their budget is from the European Union?
Well, there's going to be up to 300 personnel deployed to the region by the end of the year. At this point, it is unclear where exactly those troops and soldiers are going to come from. But we do know that there are already 60 Portuguese personnel on the ground there in the region. They've been there since May. They're on this 4-month training mission and are already providing this expertise. Portugal has said that they are willing to provide 50% of the manpower that is going to be required for this mission, and also to provide the commander on the ground, a brigadier general with 38 years of experience in this type of international missions. France, Spain have also come out and said that they could provide troops to this region. Germany and the Netherlands, on the other hand, said that they will not be providing troops on this mission. When it comes to that price tag, though, there has not been a number placed on this mission, but we do know that these things do not come cheap.
All right. So, Willem, this is not the first or the only intervention across the continent. So how can this be different from other interventions, for example, in the Sahel region, in Somalia, so that it can be at least successful?
It can be successful if we learn from mistakes being made in the other interventions. We say there's, as you mentioned, intervention in Somalia, intervention in the Sahel. So we have to learn from those mistakes. There's also international interventions in Afghanistan that did not go so well as in Syria. So we have to learn from those mistakes. We have to build on the good, and then also take into consideration the local dynamics of the scenario that needs to be challenged.
All right, Willem Els joining us there from Pretoria, and Tony Waterman in Brussels. To you both, thank you. The death toll from a hospital fire in Iraq has risen to 66. The video shared on social media shows chaotic scenes at the hospital as emergency crews arrive. Officials say an oxygen tank is thought to have exploded Monday evening in the intensive care unit. The fire has been put out. Officials say crews are searching the building looking for victims, as some may still be trapped there. This is the second serious fire at an Iraqi COVID hospital this year. A blaze in April in Baghdad killed at least 82 people. China's foreign minister is in Turkmenistan ahead of a gathering of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Wang Yi will visit 3 nations in Central Asia, with the conflict in Afghanistan a major focus of talks. Stuart Smith reports from Moscow.
Speaking with his counterpart about bilateral issues such as cooperation on natural gas and having a close relationship with regard to trading natural gas. Also committing, China supporting and committing to uphold the Turkmenistan long-standing decision to be politically neutral on global affairs, and also looking at further opportunities for the Belt and Road Initiative, which Turkmenistan is not currently part of, but both parties saying they would like to advance agreement on that as soon as is possible. Coming up, Wang Yi will be in Tajikistan for the SCO meeting to discuss with Russia, India, Pakistan, other Central Asian states, and potentially even a visit from the EU and US representatives about the region and securing stability and peace in the region. The big thing is Afghanistan right now, as the US seeks to withdraw along with NATO troops from Afghanistan. The Taliban say they have gained 85% of Afghanistan territory. That is worrying a lot of the surrounding Central Asian states, including Tajikistan, which had to call up 20,000 reserve troops to try and ensure that its border with Afghanistan is protected. Now, the Taliban say that they will ensure border integrity with all the surrounding Central Asian states, but it's certainly a big worry. And China is going in with the SCO meeting to discuss how to make sure Afghanistan does not become a cause for concern with both refugees or potentially the Taliban moving into these Central Asian states. So that'll be the focus of the SCO meeting, but also there's the opportunity here for Wang Yi to talk to some of the regional counterparts on bilateral issues. For example, with India's foreign minister to discuss border disputes between India and China. And also we expect some sort of agreement similar to as we saw on Monday with Turkmenistan, potentially a bilateral agreement for economic cooperation with Tajikistan.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. The UN warns of a global food insecurity crisis as the pandemic year is marked by a spike in world hunger. And Mauritius Prime Minister announces subsidies on basic consumer products.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A new United Nations Food Security Assessment report says that 1 in every 3 people globally faced hunger in 2020. The report also reflects a sharp rise in the number of people starving globally. The UN officials attributed the crisis to the coronavirus pandemic, conflict and climate change. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has more.
The report says the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, conflict and climate change have contributed to increased food insecurity worldwide. United Nations officials told reporters that even though the pandemic caused economic recessions globally, hunger was still a problem even before the outbreak.
One of the things that this report does is combine the different drivers. No? So we start with the typical drivers that we have been analyzing, which is conflict, climate extremes and variability, and economic downturns and slowdowns. And we see how many of those happen at the same time. And in the region, you are talking normally will be more than one or more than two of those drivers happening simultaneously. And that's where the challenge is bigger because it exacerbates even more the conditions.
The most affected regions include Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. According to the index, Asia has the highest number of affected people, with 418 million undernourished people, followed by Africa with 282 million people facing food insecurity. Both Latin America and the Caribbean have 60 million people affected in their regions.
While we are saving lives, we must invest in changing people's lives and in minimizing conflict. I think there is this need for political will, this political commitment, like the SG's call for ceasefire, but even more so to make sure that we kind of reduce some of these conflicts so that needs can actually come down.
The statistics reveal that children have suffered severe abnormalities due to lack of enough food and a proper diet. Malnutrition has subjected them to stunted growth, obesity, and emaciation. A third of women within the reproductive age are also said to be anemic. The United Nations wants to end hunger across the world by 2030. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
As the Food and Agriculture Organization releases a report on the state of food and nutrition across the world, farmers in Kenya's North Rift region are staring at huge losses due to the prevailing weather conditions. They are fearing crop failure due to a dry spell, which is threatening food security in the East African country. CGTN's Nick Mudimba has more details.
Maize farmers in many parts of Kenya usually get good harvests and profits, but this largely depends on the climate. One of those areas that has always had bumper harvest is Uasin Gishu County. However, it is now facing challenges in growing maize. The crop is a staple food in most East African countries. Jackson Kombai is one of the farmers counting losses.
I planted 50 acres of maize, but this time round I will get nothing. Even feeding the cows will be impossible because there is no maize crop, and that's a big loss for us. We took loans from financial institutions and chipped in with our savings, but we will end up empty-handed.
Financial institutions.
But the shift from rain-fed to irrigation-based maize production is still hard for many of the farmers, and depending on weather forecasts has also proven to be difficult.
We have been getting weather information, but it's not reliable. The information isn't correct. At times, it indicates that there's 60% chance of rain, but you won't even see a single drop.
Now, despite the maize planting letdown, he decided to venture on horticultural practice, which, according to him, brings more yield and, of course, more profits.
That shift is giving him hope as he has ventured into growing tomatoes, cabbages and spinach due to the lessons he learned from inconsistent rain patterns. He also pumps water from a nearby river to irrigate his garden.
I have workers and I have to maintain them so that they don't look for work because of the maize failure. I use this land for income to pay workers and to sustain my family.
The State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2021 report focuses on complementary food system solutions. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Uasin Gishu County, Kenya.
Cindy Holman, a senior economist in the Agricultural Development Economics Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, of the United Nations based in Rome, is joining us with more on this development. Cindy, this report paints a rather worrying picture of food insecurity across the world. What were the major causes of this and how can they be addressed?
Yeah, I think maybe the first thing to point out is that these numbers that we're seeing, basically a single year increase of 161 million people that are hungry, as our first assessment since the COVID impact. And this is the biggest increase worldwide that we've seen in world hunger in decades. So it is, part of the cause is due to the COVID pandemic. We see that the main driver has been the economic downturn. So because of the containment measures of COVID, many countries around the world have gone into economic contraction and downturns. This has meant that people have lost their incomes. They've had lower wages, small businesses have been closed, informal sectors affected. So all of this translates into problems for people to access food because they don't have enough income. At the same time, we see, the growing demands for social protection to capture and to support those people. So if we look at these increases, COVID is a big player in terms of the containment and this sharp increase, but it's not the only one. And specifically focusing on Africa, it's the combination of the pandemic and the containment measures and the resulting economic downturns, but also the other drivers, which is climate, so the climate extremes and the climate-related disasters, conflicts, combined with inequality. So people's inequality related to assets and access to services.
Well, the report does also estimate that around a tenth of the global population, up to about 811 million people, were undernourished last year. Now, what was the cause and how has Africa particularly been affected by this?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, even before the COVID pandemic, we saw hunger rising, and there are three drivers that are behind that: conflict, climate change extremes, and economic downturns. The pandemic just added an additional challenge and boost. Africa is unique in that it's the only region in the world that is hit by all three of those. So the increases in hunger in Africa, which have been the sharpest last year, is the only region that is hit by all three of those drivers. And many countries are facing many at the same time. And that has led to these high increases in Africa.
All right, Cindy Holman joining us there via Zoom. Thank you for that update. Well, Africa has recorded an unprecedented rise in hunger, with an estimated 21% of the population being food insecure. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, over 280 million people affected by malnutrition are in Africa. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy tells us more.
The 2021 State of Food Security Report highlights a huge increase in hunger in Africa. In many parts of the continent, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to severe economic recession and hampered access to food.
This report shows that millions worldwide are now suffering from the devastating effects of COVID-19 on food systems.
But the pandemic alone is not to blame for the food and nutrition crisis. As this year's report reminds us, conflicts, climate change, economic recessions are also driving food insecurity and malnutrition.
The report says that even before the pandemic, hunger was already spreading fast across much of Africa.
How can we accept that millions upon millions of people go hungry every day in a world that produces enough food to feed its entire population?
African nations affected by conflict could see worsening hunger unless action is taken now.
Again, it is us human beings that cause these conflicts for individual, national, or other egoistic reasons. This destroys livelihoods, colleagues, and it affects production, it affects supply chains, it affects governance, and it also leads to investors shying away from these countries, these regions, these areas. All of this has to stop if we want to really tackle all the root causes of hunger.
Now is the time for bold ideas, bold commitment, and bold leadership to do things that have never been done before. This is true for global health security and for transforming our food systems.
The report has urged policymakers to address poverty and structural inequalities by boosting the food value chain in poor communities. Other key recommendations include strengthening climate resilience and implementing social protection measures that will assist families so that they do not have to sell their meager assets in order to buy food. Daniel Arap-Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
In Mauritius, Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth announced several subsidies aimed at lowering the price of several consumer products. An additional 7 products were earmarked for this, including canned fish and tomatoes, powdered milk and others. The subsidies took effect on Monday and will be in place for 6 months. This move follows a surge in the price of consumer staples triggered by prolonged economic disruptions due to COVID-19. CGTN's Liu Feifei has more on this story.
Mauritius is recognized globally as a best practice model in the battle against COVID-19. However, the success, thanks to stringent lockdown measures and border closing, has come at an economic cost. While Mauritius enjoys a relatively modernized and diversified economy, tourism still accounts for some 30% of the GDP. And at the same time, the island nation is heavily dependent on imports for basic consumer staples. This double-edged sword of less foreign currency coming in and lots of it going out has put significant pressure on consumer wallets.
The economy locally has been hit more significantly than elsewhere in the world. Last year, GDP dropped by somewhat close to 15%, which obviously is quite a huge drop and much higher than what happened in the rest of the world. Because if we look at Europe or even the US, the contraction was limited and didn't exceed 10%.
Compounding this domestic contraction in the economy, costs of imports have skyrocketed while the Mauritian rupee has devalued, creating a perfect storm for people struggling to put food on the table for their families.
The subsidy will help the public to buy food for their daily needs. The price of food has gone up too high and the people, they couldn't afford to buy food anymore. But with these new subsidies and the lower prices, people can buy what they need again.
This new subsidy measure will bring prices for the 7 items down to what they were as of January 1st this year.
The government will allocate 12 million USD roughly for the next 6 months to support the subsidies and importers, which, if we look at it in terms of GDP, accounts for less than 1% of the current GDP, which is quite manageable at the end.
While some detractors believe the subsidy has come too late, others are concerned about the lack of government price monitoring and enforcement capabilities. But most Mauritians find the news a welcome relief.
The situation in Mauritius is that everyone is suffering in their own way because of the problems brought here by COVID-19. To help everyone now, the price decrease on food from the government is very good.
While the fallout from COVID-19 continues to pressurize the Mauritian economy, what we're seeing is the national government stepping in to protect those who are most vulnerable. And even though these new subsidies provide only temporary relief, the real goal is to vaccinate 60% of the population in time for the scheduled full border openings in October. When the tourists come back, economic recovery will be on the horizon. Liu Feifei, CGTN, Port Louis, Mauritius.
Let's now take a look at your business news, I beg your pardon. Here's what's ahead. Moscow lifts the 2015 ban on flights to Egyptian resorts. And Nigeria's key budget parameters approved. Deficit to hit $13.7 billion.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
South Africa's manufacturing production rose just over 35% year-on-year in May, after rising 88% in April. That's according to preliminary data released by Stats South Africa. The largest contributions were made by motor vehicles, parts and accessories, as well as other transport equipment, which went up almost 216%. Basic iron and steel, non-ferrous metal products and machinery also rose 42%, while food and beverages increased by 21.5%. Meanwhile, seasonally adjusted manufacturing production decreased by 2.6% in May this year, compared with the same month of April. While South Africa's national power utility Eskom has put forward a $10 billion plan to multilateral banks and agencies to help it move to renewable energy production. The development is significant as the utility generates more than 90% of South Africa's electricity using coal. CGTN's Angelo Coppola brings us the story.
Eskom has decided to make the transition as it hasn't been able to maintain the existing coal plants as well as complete new projects on time.
As we shut down our power plants, where are the opportunities and what are the opportunities to repower them with renewables, to repurpose them? But we're also looking at accelerating the renewables plan, looking at alternative options for energy security, for microgrids, for grid strengthening.
Climate change activists have been pushing the utility to move to sustainable energy sources to power the country's electricity grid.
If you look at a lot of the economic modeling and the systems analysis around what the best, most affordable, most job creating and reliable energy system is, it's a renewable energy future, one that's predominantly renewable, solar and wind with battery storage and the likes.
Not everyone agrees that renewables are the solution, specifically when it comes to dispatchable or baseload electricity.
Unless you've got a very large energy storage system, which hasn't been made to work commercially yet at the level we're looking at, or you've got some kind of backup power, renewables won't meet your need. If you just had PV, for example, PV can't meet the evening peak because the sun's not shining.
This isn't stopping Eskom from working with renewables in the short term as the coal-fired power stations reach their end of life. Finding the funding for the transition is a key focus.
The terms that we've been discussing with a lot of these financiers as well is very, very concessional, highly concessional loans, long payback periods, payment holidays, low interest rates. So that's what we're looking at. And on the side, in parallel, we're looking at the strategy to resolve the debt issues.
Eskom says it's got a plan to move from coal-fired power stations to renewable energy. The question now is how quickly it can do it and who's going to pay for it. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt has welcomed Russia's decision to lift the ban on charter flights to and from the North African nation following a presidential decree issued by the Kremlin. The ban was applied in 2015 after the crash of a Russian passenger plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, killing all on board in what was believed to be an act of terror. With the details, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
Egypt is bracing for the influx of Russian travelers. Russia had continuously postponed the return of its tourists to the North African nation since its passenger jet crash over Sinai in 2015. Egyptian authorities have been working hard on improving security measures since that fateful day.
Egypt had to meet a lot of requirements, so it firstly started from the national security of Egypt, and besides as well like protecting all the tourists worldwide coming to Egypt. So the government had to escalate it up and to upgrade all their security infrastructure across all the aircrafts, and as well on the at each of the port or each of the airports dealing with all the nationalities. There was involvement from different institutions in a global wise, ensuring that all the standard up to the most according to all the different benchmarks from international airport has been met in order to ensure the safest and the most efficient security systems are in place within the Egyptian government.
Before the flight ban in 2015, more than 3 million Russians visited Egypt per year, the highest of any nationality. Goldman Sachs estimates Russian tourism could pump $3 billion of badly needed hard currency into the economy. That's nearly as much as total tourism revenue for 2020. The tourism industry has always been a top hard currency earner for the state budget and employs millions of people. That's why the North African country had to seek alternatives during the absence of foreign visitors to keep the sector afloat.
This was Egypt's strategy since 2015. They tried to firstly to meet the requirement of the Russian government, and besides as well to try to open different source market, of which Egypt has started like approaching like the different Western countries of Europe. Indeed, as well, we started like focusing a lot on the Arab countries and the neighbor countries, and encouraging the Arabian, which started to represent around 30%, between 25 to 30% from the total arrivals are coming from the Arab region. And in addition, after COVID-19, there was different strategies starting from the staycations or promoting Egypt for the Egyptians, creating new different type of products as well, creating and opening new destinations.
The government is forecasting 1 million Russian visitors before the end of the year. pushing tourism revenue up to $9 billion from $4 billion in 2020. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has moved closer to joining the East African community after an assessment by a verification team. The team spent 8 days in the eastern DRC city of Goma and is expected to write a report about their findings on the DRC's suitability for admissions into the regional bloc. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The East African Community's verification mission to the DRC was led by the Regional Bloc's Secretary General, Dr. Peter Mathuki. The team concluded its assessment of the DRC joining the community on July 4th and was tasked with establishing whether the DRC conforms with the criteria of admission of foreign countries to the community. Under the East African Community Treaty, all countries seeking to join the bloc must follow practices of good governance, the rule of law, democracy, and human rights. The DRC President, Felix Tshisekedi, hailed the progress made by the community in integrating his country. The verification mission is expected to write a report about its findings and submit it to the community's Council of Ministers. That report will then be given to the heads of state of the East African Community for a final decision on the DRC's admission to the regional bloc. If approved, the DRC will become the 7th member of the bloc. The other member states are Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. The DRC's entry into the community will ease trade with those countries and enable its citizens to move freely without requiring visas. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Egyptian boxers eye the first Olympic medal since Athens 2004 Games.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your